Hi, I'm Sarah Maffey-Holland, and I'm a licensed New Hampshire real estate agent, and this is Man versus Land. It's a segment intended to educate the public on homeowner and landowner topics as discussed with guests who serve as experts in those fields. Today's guest is Carrot Bennett, and you are the State Extension Forester for the UNH Extension Service. Before we begin, the show does not constitute legal advice and is for educational purposes only. We are willing to field any questions that you may have if you'd like to send us a message on Facebook at Man vs. Land NH. Karen, welcome.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
Yeah, Karen, why don't you explain a little bit about what you do and what your background is?
Sure. So I've worked for UNH Cooperative Extension for 35 or 36 years. It's hard to believe that, but I spent about half that time working as a county forester, first in Hillsborough County, then in Merrimack County. And in that job, I visited woodlot owners and helped them figure out what to do with their land. And I mention that because we have 9 county foresters in this state that are available to help landowners who have questions about what to do with their properties. So folks should keep that in mind. But currently, I don't do landowner visits like I used to. I cover the entire state instead of an individual county. And I do things like workshops. I do things like this, you know. I write fact sheets. I write newspaper articles, do our web site, nhwoods.org. So I do a variety of things in this position. But there's no funner job than being a county forester. So
I imagine
yeah.
being outside and,
Yes.
and taking in what we have to offer is really great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're here today to talk about current use.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what current use is and what its history is.
Okay. Well, let's start with history. Actually, current use assessment is what I like to call it, or some people call it current use taxation. It's a tax law that allows for land that's undeveloped, namely forest land and farmland that we often lump together as open space land. It allows that land to be assessed and taxed at its current use, as opposed to as if there was a house on it or a commercial development. And back in the late 60s, folks wanted to have this sort of assessment ability for forest and farmland, but the state constitution didn't allow for it. So they actually had a constitutional amendment back in 1968, and that was passed, and in 1973 the current use law was passed. And its purpose really is to keep New Hampshire as New Hampshire, to keep open space open, to allow landowners to be able to afford to own their land.
Oh, that's very nice.
Yeah.
And so it benefits the homeowner, the landowner.
It benefits the landowner, but it definitely benefits all of us.
Yes.
It benefits all of us because we have, you know, green forest land and farmlands to appreciate. If people couldn't afford to own their land, they perhaps would develop it more. So this law really is about protecting land for the individual, but more importantly for the citizens in the state. So it protects water, you know, clean water, recreation, air, aesthetics. This time of year when we're getting into the foliage season, most of New Hampshire is owned by private citizens, and we're looking at their foliage.
Right.
Yeah. And we can thank current use for that. I think there's about 3 million acres in the state in current use. New Hampshire's about 5.8 million acres.
Oh.
So there's a good percentage of the state being is covered by current use assessment.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really great, and that's speaks to who we are as a state, which is wonderful.
Right.
And why people come here to visit us.
Right.
You know, which is very nice. So this is a state rule, right?
State law.
State law. So every town is required to offer current use?
Absolutely. Every
taxation?
town does have to require have to have current use and follow the state regs,
Okay.
RSA 79, and there are rules that implement the state law, and the towns are supposed to follow those rules. You know, they're somewhat complicated, so there might be some variations throughout the state, but they're not supposed to be much. They're supposed to follow the rules.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get into some of those specifics.
Okay.
So what type of property and qualifies for current use?
So in brief, you need to have 10 acres of undeveloped land.
Okay.
That's forest, farmland, wetland, unproductive land.
Okay.
Those are the general categories of land that can qualify for current use. So what's undeveloped? Undeveloped just means there's not a building on it or betterments to get to the building.
Okay.
So of course most woodlots have houses attached to them. So you can be in current use as long as you have 10 acres of your woodlot or your farmland or your field that's not covered by your house, your lawn, and your drive and your utilities.
Okay.
So the current use law has a great word in it. It's called curtilage.
Okay.
And curtilage just means the footprint of the building and the surrounding improved areas and the road that leads
gets
to
you
it.
there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Great.
So I don't know if I answered all your questions, but in brief, you need 10 acres of undeveloped land.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how would one apply for current use taxation?
Sure. So you apply through your town using state forms.
Okay.
You have to use a form called CU10.
Okay.
It's all online, and later perhaps I'll give you a web address that
Sure.
people can use to access more information. But so you need current use 10 form. You need a map that shows your property. Tax maps are perfectly fine to use, by the way. You need to have it to scale. You need to show what land isn't in current use. In other words, your curtilage.
Okay.
The land that isn't in current use. You need to show the various categories on the map. So as I mentioned earlier, there's farmland, forest land, unproductive, and wetland. Well, within each of those general categories, there are different classifications.
Okay.
So, for example, the forest land category has white pine forest type, hardwood forest type, or other forest type.
Okay.
The white pine forest type is all primarily white pine.
Okay.
51% of the trees are white pine.
Okay.
That makes it a white pine type. So you show, if you have a white pine area, you show that on your map. If you have hardwood, and hardwood includes red oak, paper birch, white birch,
Okay.
a couple others that I can't recall right now, but if you have 51% of those kinds of trees in a general area, you show them on the map. And then the other category are hardwoods that aren't in the hardwood category, hardwood and some softwoods that aren't in the other category. So you draw a map that has the different categories, the different forest types. And if you have wetland that's unproductive, that's incapable of growing anything, or other unproductive land, you can also show that as another category. And unproductive land would be something like the top of Mount Monadnock. It truly is unproductive. Nothing can grow there. Okay. So I think that's a reasonably good description of the map. So the form, the map, and then a filing fee.
Of course.
Always a filing fee. And then depending on what classification you're going into, you may have to add some other things. For example, if you're in the farmland category, you might want to supply what's called a soil potential index.
Okay.
Basically, the farmland category assessment range is quite large. It's $25 to $425.
Okay.
Well, if you have great farmland, you may deserve to be assessed at that high end of the range. But if you're mediocre or lower, you should be assessed at the lower end of the range.
Okay.
And the soil potential index is a way to determine where you should be in that range. Okay. So if you're in farmland, you'll want to have a soil potential index done, and if you have it done, when you apply, you supply that information. If you're in the forest land category, you can either just be in plain old forest land, or if you're actively managing your forest land, you can be in a category or assessment range that's called forest land with documented stewardship. And if you're in that category, you have to supply other documentation, and we can talk about that if you'd like.
Sure.
But perhaps you want me to take a break and you might want to ask a question. Those are the things that you need to supply when you apply.
Now, for the average landowner who has, say, 15 acres and they want to put 10 of it into current use, and they're looking at doing this application, as far as dividing out the property on the map with the different types, is that easy for a landowner to do, or would you recommend they contact someone to do it?
Sure. Some people are able to and some aren't. I mean, everybody has different capabilities, and if you aren't able, we do have licensed foresters in the state that can do that sort of service for you for a reasonable fee. Nowadays with Google Earth, and people are getting very smart with aerial photography and satellite imagery because of those remote sensing products. If you are able to get your property on Google Earth, you might actually be able to see where your white pine is, where your hardwood is, and so you can draw that in. Okay. So I would say know what your capabilities are, and if you're unable to do that, then hire someone for a modest fee, and you'll do a much better application than if you do it yourself if you don't know how.
Right. Well, those are great suggestions. Yeah. And you had touched on a stewardship plan for the property to get additional reduction in your assessment. And I guess there are a couple of different ways that you can go about getting additional reductions. Sure.
And I'm going to just refer to my notes so I make sure I get this all right. So the idea with the forest stewardship category is that it recognizes that there's a cost to taking care of land. People sometimes don't think of that, but there's a cost of maintaining boundaries, there's a cost of maintaining culverts if you have trails and roads, there's a cost of doing management plans. So the stewardship category, the assessment is lower than the regular category, and that is because it reflects this cost. So you can be in this category by a couple of different ways. One is if you are a certified tree farm. Okay. You can give them the evidence, give the town the evidence that you're a certified tree farm, and that could be in the form of your certificate or a letter from the tree farm committee. There are other certification entities. SFI is one, FSC, I don't mean to be alphabet soup, but there are other certification categories, and if you're in that category, you know what I'm talking about. Sure. So if you provide that evidence, that's another way to get documented stewardship. Another way is to supply a plan, and I'll go over what the key plan elements are in a bit. Okay. But if you don't want to supply the town your entire forest stewardship plan, because it has it might have some information in it that you want to keep confidential. For example, often plans will have volume and values in it. So, perhaps you don't want that available to the public. So if you don't want to supply a plan, you can complete another form called CU12. Okay. And the CU12, basically you certify that you have that you're following stewardship, and you give an abbreviated plan. Okay. So I don't know if you'd like to talk about the plan elements or if
Yeah.
that's too in the weeds.
No, I think that's great.
perfect.
Yeah, let's
Okay.
go for it.
Well, this is all, by the way, very nicely summarized in the rules of current use and also in a handbook. And again, I'll give you a link so that you
Sure.
can viewers can see the handbook and brush up on what I have to say and correct me when I misstep. But anyways, plan elements. You need to have some landowner objectives in it. You need to have your forest stands, the white pine, the hardwood, the other other hardwood types described, and you have to describe them using terms about timber, fish and wildlife, soil, water quality, recreation, aesthetics, cultural features, and by that, we don't mean going to the theater. We mean stone walls and cellar holes. Forest protection, that means, if there's fire kinds of things to consider. Wetlands, threatened and endangered species, and unique natural communities. So those are all elements that you should talk about in your plan or address in your plan. You should address your boundary maintenance schedule, your access and road maintenance schedule if that applies, and it's supposed to be signed by a licensed forester.
Okay.
So those are the plan elements.
Great. And as a realtor, I have some clients that have stewardship plans in place, and it's very helpful for me in knowing what the property entails because they're usually large tracts of land.
Sure.
So it's very interesting.
Right, and I would say that these stewardship plans aren't just to qualify you for a lower category in current use. They're to help you manage your land. They're really useful for that.
No.
And as a matter of fact, I would say that if you think, oh, this sounds so complicated, but you want to be involved in current use, the most important thing to do is to get in current use. That's where you're going to get your biggest tax saving, the lowest assessment or a low assessment. Going from plain forest land to documented stewardship reduces your assessment, but the big savings is getting it in current use to begin with. So this stewardship plan is a great thing to have. It's very practical for your own use, but the most important thing is to get in current use rather than worry about the plan at this point. Yeah.
Now, with a stewardship plan, with my realtor hat on, can that be transferred to the next owner, or would a new plan need to be done?
Well, it can be transferred to the next owner if the owner has the same objectives. And so often plans are very transferable, but sometimes people have quirky objectives, and so the plan is really more appropriate for them. So I would say that could be something that one owner passes along to the other, but the new owner should definitely look at it and see if they agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe revise it to fit their needs and interests.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what other categories are there as far as getting an even reduced assessment?
Well, I would say that the forest land with documented stewardship is the way you reduce the forest land assessment. The way you reduce the farmland assessment is to use your soil potential index, and that's too complicated to cover here.
Sure.
But believe me, it's worthwhile if you have farmland. And the farmland doesn't necessarily have to be actively farmed. Forage land, well, it theoretically should be farmland, but you don't have to be a dairy farmer or a vegetable farmer. You can be a lower key farmer, so to speak.
Sure.
So farmland, go to soil potential index. There is another category called unproductive, and that's the absolute lowest.
Okay.
The assessment is only $18 an acre, not the tax, the assessment.
Okay.
And so that's very low. But it should really be land that's unproductive. You can't grow anything to harvest for timber, for cordwood, for farm purposes. So there should be very few acres in that category. As a matter of fact, if you're in that category, you can hamstring yourself in the sense that you're not supposed to cut timber or cordwood off it. So, you know, that category really is only for land that can't grow anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We had we did another segment earlier with the New Hampshire Fish and Game, and they had mentioned current use for homeowners or landowners who offer their property open to the public.
Sure.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that.
Thank you. I forgot. I see where you're going with your question about lowering your assessment. So if it fits in with, again, your goals and objectives, well, let me back up. Current use does not require that you allow people on your property. Of course, in New Hampshire, we love it that most landowners keep their land open and are very welcoming. But it doesn't require that you keep it open. However, there is a category called the recreation adjustment that you can further reduce your assessment by 20% if you allow certain activities.
Okay.
And those activities, there are 6 of them that you have to explicitly allow.
Okay.
Hiking, hunting, nature observation. I'm going to have to look at my cheat sheets because fishing, skiing, and snowshoeing.
Oh.
They're all fairly low impact activities. Some might say that hunting and fishing, well, they're extractive, but you know, they're fairly low impact. So you have to allow those if you're in that category.
Okay.
You do not have to allow camping, any wheeled vehicles, you know, biking of any kind, even, you know, regular mountain biking. You don't, and certainly you don't have to allow other people to cut any trees on your property.
Sure.
Those are yours. So yes, that's a very important adjustment that people can afford themselves of. Now, there are some times when you are allowed, even if you have this recreation adjustment, to temporarily post your property against certain uses. And you have to get permission from the selectmen if you're in this category and you want to do that. And it's for practical reasons. For example, let's say, you know, you cut hay a couple times off your hay field, and you don't want people trampling your hay field. Perhaps you can post, you know, don't cross my hay field until, you know, August 1 or whenever you stop haying. So there's some limited reasons you can post even against these activities, even if you're in that recreation adjustment, but you do have to get permission to do that. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I mean, it makes sense that a landowner, if you are okay, you know, with folks coming onto your property, and if you have enough of it, then why not take advantage of that?
Yeah, and you can, for example, post the back 40 and keep the front.
Sure.
Allow people in the back 40 and keep, you know, right around your house, you know, posted against certain uses. But yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
This is all wonderful information.
Yeah, there's so much,
yeah.
you know. And sometimes we in Extension do current use workshops, you know, and we'll promote them on our website if people are are interested in knowing more. And I mentioned county foresters earlier.
Yeah.
As I said, one of the main activities that they do is to walk woodlots with people. And I mean, we can't write your current use plan or do your maps, but we can consult with you and advise you and and answer your questions about current use.
Sure.
So I'd encourage people to.
And is there a fee associated with that?
Well, not an out-of-pocket fee, but you know, we are tax supported, and so you know, your taxes pay for the service. So no, there isn't a direct fee. I always hesitate to say it's free because nothing in life is free, but we work for the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension, so we're part of the land grant university, and it's a service that we provide.
Great. Yeah, and it's a wonderful service. I I don't think there are enough of you to cover the state.
No, well, we do our best. There's never enough of anybody to do everything.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Now, all right, so now we have our property in current use.
Yes, sure.
What happens if we later down the road decide that we want to build a small cabin out back, or we
Okay.
want to put in a road or whatnot?
Sure.
What happens then?
Sure. Well, let me say that first off, there are no buyout provisions in current use. In other words, you can't say, "Oh, I don't want my land in current use now. I'll pay back taxes and I'll get it out of current use, and then I'll have the flexibility to do what I want with it." You can't do that. What kicks land out of current use is making it unqualifying. What makes it unqualifying? Breaking it up into parcels less than 10 acres in size. And when I say breaking it up, I mean selling off 1 acre. Let's say you start with 10 acres and you sell 1 acre. The person who buys that 1 acre is buying a non-conforming current use property, and so they will be subject to what's called a land use change tax. So the buyer has to pay that. And you, if you keep 9 acres, will be subject to the land use change tax because you no longer own 10 acres. Now there's some exceptions to that. For example, if that person who bought the 1 acre owns 200 acres and it's contiguous, they don't have to pay the land use change tax. But by and large, that's one way that land becomes disqualified. Another way is your scenario, and that is you have 10 acres, let's say, and you build your cabin. Well, that would probably disqualify the whole 10 acres, right? Because even if you only use half an acre, it's no longer 10 acres in size. However, if you have 20 acres, the part of the property where you build the structure and any roads that service that structure would be out of current use. And again, it would just be the curtilage. You don't have to use the zoning requirements. For example, if your town says you need to have a 2 acre minimum zoning size, 2 minimum acre lot for zoning purposes, just because you put up a house, you don't have to keep 2 acres out. You only have to keep the curtilage out. So if you develop in any way, the part that is developed has to come out of current use. And when does it come out? It comes out when you put the shovel in the ground, when you start to make the change. And this is very important because we didn't talk earlier, but I mentioned the land use change tax. The land use change tax is due when you no longer qualify for current use, or a part of the land doesn't qualify, and it's 10% of the fair market value at the time of change in use. So it's important to know when you actually make the change in use, because real estate values fluctuate.
And who determines the fair market value of that property?
Right. You don't. So, the town assessor would do that. Yeah, sure. I mean, current use it's a real estate law, and so just as the town assessor, whether it be the selectmen or if you have someone specific in town that does that work, they're the ones that determine that. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Any other common questions that you get on current use?
There are tons of them, but because there's a camera in front of us, I can't think of a single one. Let's see. We covered land use change tax.
Yeah, I'm looking through our notes here.
A lot of times people do talk about or ask questions about, well, how much money can I save? Well, I haven't done any math, so I don't want to get into math because I'm not that swift on my head. But I would say a lot. And then people say, well, is that fair?
That's a great question.
I don't have enough land to qualify for current use. Is it fair to me as a homeowner that you who have 20 acres should have current use? And the the rationale and the reason that we think it's fair is that your land, your 20 acres, doesn't require much by way of services. You don't have a kid on your 20 acres. If you have a kid, the child is associated with a house,
Right.
and you're taxed dearly, I'm sure, on your house. So undeveloped land requires very little in terms of municipal or town services.
Or resources.
Yeah. You know, it doesn't require that the road be plowed.
Right.
It's the houses that require that. So
Okay.
sometimes people ask that philosophical question, well, is that fair? And I would say that it is from the perspective of, well, what is costing the town the money? And it's not the land, it's the people. And I say that as someone who doesn't have land in current use.
Sure.
Yeah. And sometimes people ask, well, isn't this law for the rich? Well, as I mentioned earlier, over 3 million acres are in current use in New Hampshire, and that land is primarily just owned by people like you or me, even though I don't have any. But you know, the average citizen, it really isn't owned by rich people. It's owned by average folks, and so sometimes I get questions related to that fairness question, and you know, who benefits. You know, we started out by you asked the perfect question is who benefits, and really we all do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's good to remind folks of as well, because we do have such a large tourist industry here in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And this is, you know, we like to joke that this is where Massachusetts vacations.
Yeah.
But
well, yeah.
but if we didn't have
Yeah.
current use, then like you mentioned, we wouldn't have those great resources that people would be coming here to visit.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so I don't know if I said earlier or not, but most of New Hampshire is owned by private landowners.
Yeah.
Okay, so the number, 83% of New Hampshire is forested. So we have a lot of trees out there. We're the second most forested state in the country after Maine.
Okay.
And most of that land is owned by private individuals, about 70% plus or minus. It's not owned by the federal government. It's not owned by the state or the towns or the county. It's owned by individuals. And this current use assessment law is really designed to benefit all of us, but to help by helping private individuals afford to own the land. Yeah.
I think it's wonderful, and although we feel sometimes that it's unique to New Hampshire, you had mentioned earlier that that it's not. It may be under a different name.
Right. Right. I haven't done any real study, but I think most of the states in the country have some form of current use law.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, anything else that you want to mention before we wrap?
I think that covers it for me. I would just say that I think we'll be able to show on the screen if people want more information about forests and woodlots and current use. They can get in touch with us through our website at nhwoods.org, or we have a 1-800 number, 800-444-8978, or we have an email address. forest.info@unh.edu. So that's forest.info@unh.edu, and that's any of those places is a good way to get in touch with your county forester for more information. And I do have a few resources that I put up on a website, and they can be accessed at a bit.ly email or URL, bit.ly/current use. And I encourage people who have more questions to check that out. So
excellent. Well, thank you so much, Karen, for being here and joining us.
Well, thank you for making this painless.
Oh, good. Yay.
Good.
And like she mentioned, if you have any more questions, just go to nhwoods.org for more information on current use, and certainly come and follow us on Facebook at Man vs. Land NH. Thank you.